before any request, I must tell you that my days in matchmaking agencies are over. So, okay. So, after this lovely introduction by Christoph, oh my God. How this thing works. Okay. So many different. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about Guanabara Bay. And by the end of this half an hour, more or less, you all should be able to pronounce it, Guanabara Bay, which is the first quiz that I'm going to have after the presentation. But what I'm trying to present here is one chapter of my manuscript. And it says, yes, it's a study on Guanabara Bay, the transformation of my dissertation into a book. It's something that I have been working for some time now, but it's finally shaping up for the final book. So what you're going to see is just part of it. Okay, it is. This, if you have no idea where Guanabara Bay is, where is it? Okay, let's try again. How do I get the pointer?
It's the big button on top. Big button on top.
Yes, it is. So this is Brazil. In Brazil, there's this part just above the Tropic of Capricorn, it's not working, which is Rio de Janeiro. And in Rio de Janeiro, you have this bay. This is Guanabara Bay. You probably know better because of this image, saying, Cristo Redentor, braços abertos. No, okay. This is Guanabara Bay. This is the sugar loaf, the Christ Redeemer, and the bay begins more or less by here. As you can see, it's an urban bay. And my study is a study about the Guanabara Bay over 100 years, and the different ways in which the state has changed their understanding of environment, understanding of urban environment over the 20th century. In this particular chapter that I'm going to discuss with you, I'm looking at the role of the scientists and how Brazilian scientists working in Guanabara Bay created a certain code of scientific practices to deal with pollution, with urban pollution, and most specifically marine pollution. And there's a bit of serendipity story. And there's also a love story. And that's what I want to tell you. This is Guanabara Bay. It's a couple art picture from 2000. And this place here is called Manguinhos. Which is a large mangrove forest, today mostly landfilled, as this bay has very little to do with the bay that we could have found 500 years ago. A lot of this has been changed over time with excavations and dredging and landfilling, mostly landfilling. So the story I'm going to tell you that happens here is a story, okay. Something happened here. So supposed to, how can I go back? Okay. I want, before anything, introduce the characters of this story. And as I introduce the characters, I also going to build the narrative. And a part of this is because there's a movie by Truffaut called The Man and the Woman, and I love the movie, so I always wanted to present something called The Man and the Woman and Tropical Island. In this case, these people are, the woman is Luisa Crown, the man is Legend de Oliveira, and the island is Pinheiro Island. And I'm going to introduce them for you. First, Legend. Legend de Oliveira he has a career as a scientist that reflects very much the formation of scientists in Brazil in the 20th century. He was a med student. He was studied to be a doctor, a physician. In a moment when Brazil was creating and fortifying its sanitarist culture, and we're talking about not the first part of the turn of the century, but the 1930s. And you have some centers, well-established centers of research in sanitarism, which are developing. The most important then is Instituto Oswaldo Cruz, created in Rio de Janeiro in the turn of the 20th century. So at that moment, the center was well established. It was very...
Please look out.
Don't lean on the podium. It will fall and you'll be sad. I know. He joined the Instituto. So the Instituto Oswaldo Cruz was already had been created in the turn of the century by this guy, Oswaldo Cruz. It was very much inspired in the Pasteur Institute in Paris. It had a huge reputation in Brazil as a science center, and they were expanding new activities. As there was not a real center for biology or University of Biology in Brazil, there was no university in Brazil at this time, just certain kinds of faculties and different courses. Most of the new scientists were recruited among other more traditional careers, as for instance medicine, and that was the case with Eugênio de Oliveira. So he was invited to join first as a sanitary physician, and eventually he abandoned that to specialize as a immunologist. And in this particular, as a young scholar, as a young researcher in 1937, he would join some of the senior scientists in 1937 to collect material, animals and the bay to be used in the labs. That was the beginning of the hydrobiology lab, an idea of creating a lab that would study the environment of Guanabara Bay and study the way it could be, new species could be introduced in the bay that would be useful for a Brazilian economy. So it was an idea of pure science, but also applied to a future economic interest. He was a very resourceful, recognized as a very resourceful student, and that's going to show later on in the story that I'm telling you. Let's go now to the woman in the story. Louisa Crow appears 10 years later. By that point, you already have a center for study for natural history. So she had just graduated as a natural history major, and which was considered pretty much a career for women. But let's consider this particularly. She was being prepared to be a school teacher, a biology school teacher, someone with connected to high school. And as Christoph told, she really didn't want to be a school teacher. But there was no way that it was not so easy. There was no grad studies at this point, especially not grad studies for women. So her solution was to keep going, even after graduation, going to the university and auditing the classes until she would attract the attention of one of the professors who invited her to apply to a position as an intern in the Instituto Oswaldo Cruz, the same institute. Instituto Oswaldo Cruz was famous for giving opportunity for women scientists. And that's when Louisa joined in 1947. This woman, for instance, is Berta Lutz, a biologist, the daughter of Adolfo Lutz, one of the senior biologists in the institute, and one of the most important Brazilian feminists. She was the suffragette. She was a person who fought for the right for women to vote, and she was an extremely good biologist. Her own research is outstanding, and she was a scientist until she retired from the institute in the 1960s. One of the first women to vote. So there was this possibility for women in the institute, and that's where Louisa Crow went. Unfortunately, she joined the institute more after a large change in the Brazilian bureaucracy, which made it very difficult for the institute to hire her as a full scholar. This was after 37, in 47 it was quite difficult, so you had only positions as interns. Again, the fact that she was a woman made her this career possible, because the pay was so low that a man who had been the breadwinner for the family couldn't stay in the position. So it's a very huge irony that so many women are attracted for positions in science through the Institute Oswald Cruz because the pay was so low. She joined the institute in 47 and she was assigned immediately to work in the Ilha dos Pinheiros with Lejeune de Oliveira in the hydrobiology station. She would be an intern for 14 years. So the next time you complain about your internship, remember that, okay? And eventually she would marry Lejeune. Lejeune was married first. He divorced, separated. There was no divorce in Brazil at that time. They separated, they got married, they had a child together. And she, although she was a brilliant scientist, she published on her own, she was recognized on her own, but she shaped her own career around Lejeune's career, which was something common to be done by married scientists. The Institute has some other scientists, very good, and but they tend to become single. There was an interview that's very interesting about, but anyway. She shaped her career around Lejeune. The third character of our story is the island. Pinheiro Island is right here. It's a beautiful area with mangroves. Those would be the mangroves that you can find in Janeiro. And it was an area from where you could see the dolphins swimming in the bay. There's still some of them, 47 to be exact. But at that point in 37, you'd have something, I think the population of dolphins by the beginning of the century would get close to 800 dolphins within Guanabara Bay. It was a triangular, a very small island with a higher area where the station, the lab would be located. And all this area here would be of forests of mangroves. Here's a different view about the different facilities that you would have in the island over the 30 years. The island was one of an archipel of other 9 islands, and it has a very old occupation from the 19th century on, and you could find some wells and other facilities from that period. Those were perfect for what the Institute wanted. They wanted an area where they could analyze the mangroves, catch species there was a high biodiversity they could use in all the different labs of the institution. So they would use the island exactly to analyze the behavior of marine animals, but also to capture shellfish and crustaceans and others for the studies in the other sectors of the research institute. And the best part is that the reason why the Institute of Oswald Cruz was so famous is because they began to produce vaccines. So they also wanted a place where they could abandon rhesus monkeys that they could use for vaccination and just let them roaming in the island. And the island was safe enough. It was far enough from all the other islands that they would not leave the place, and at the same time they could reproduce at ease. I can tell you as I interviewed Luisa Krause that it's not so much fun to have lots of rhesus monkeys in the place where you're trying to have a hydrobiology lab. She said that one day they forgot to close the lab. The next day they had very little lab left. There was another time that because there was nothing there, she had to carry lunch. They had to carry lunch when they go for the lab. One day she left some banana or something around like this falling from her bag, and she had a bunch of monkeys just running after her in a kind of terror movie that you could do in Brazil. Anyway, the monkeys and the scientists lived happily with other species in the islands. And that's the way we make narratives, right? You have to have stories, chronology, changes. And that's what we're going to see. There is a trajectory for our story. This is when the lab was created, the hydrobiology lab. This is when it was deactivated. And the big change happens right here, 1947. That's when Lise comes to join them. But that's also, no, that is 57, sorry, I got the number wrong. In 57, the lab is no longer so useful. Why? Because the moment anytime there is a high tide and the water from the bay gets into the tanks, all the animals die in the tanks. And first they are kind of they're intrigued by that, and then they realize it's a big problem. And then they realize, well, we can no longer fulfill our usefulness, our mission with the institute. So we can destroy the lab, we can move the lab from another situation, or we can adapt. It's pretty much Darwinian dilemma. And they decided to adapt. It was not so much a decision that there's not much other alternative. So instead of studying the life of marine organisms, they started to study the death of marine organisms, how you live in a polluted situation, in polluted waters. They become, as I said in the title of the presentation, I forgot to start the timing. They become a center for monitoring pollution. But even this bare facts, they don't build a narrative. So when we're trying to create this story, you have to understand that there's three characters here. Oh, sorry. There's three characters here. They are no longer the man, the woman, and the other. They are not isolated. They are integrated in a much larger narrative, and that's what I want to show. Let me just show what I meant. This is the moment of change, 57, sorry. This is the island as it was in 37, the archipel. In 47, that's why I put that date. 8 of the islands were merged in a single one, an artificial island where today it was built the University of Brazil, nowadays called the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, which is exactly my own university. And this thing has changed completely the regime of waters, the way the water circulated here, and the way new water could renew these areas. As a result, and other industries were created right here. As a result, from an area where you could study hydrobiology, you ended up having a very highly polluted area. But we're going to get there. My point is how you build the narratives here. Which kind of approaches are you going to use, to adopt, in order to tell the story of this man, this woman, and the island? The first thing that I decided to get is to look at the city. This was not in 37 urban area. It was a suburban area, close to colonies of fishermen, and very dangerous in the sense of malaria. So it was not an area that people would want to go in 37. It was, but that changes after the Second World War. What you're going to have is this. As the population in Rio increases dramatically, as it happened in the rest of Latin America, the islands the entire metropolitan area of Rio has something around 2 million people in 37. In 1960, we have 4.8, and now in 2000, 10.8. And today we're talking about 12 million people. This, you can see the island of, how can I get that back? The island would be someplace around here. Oh. The positions are nice until you have to go back and forth. And then they're just a pain. Okay. Here, the island will be someplace around here. You can see here the creation of the new modernized island. The point is the city has grown very much. The university was created changing the ecosystem, the environmental dynamics of that particular area. But not only that, we have a large area of petrochemical complex being built in that particular area. You can see in this picture some of the oil floating in the bay. A heavy use of DDT made this area very safe for new colonies, or safe enough that you would have an expansion of the city to areas that previously were considered malaria-ridden. And the creation of these favelas changed even the relationship that the scientists had with the population around there. First, until 1958, all the articles written by Lise and Lejeune would refer to the community around the Pinheiros as fishermen. They were partners. They would hire the fishermen to do a number of works. From 1958 on, the populations referred as favelados, slum dwellers, gang members. They are dangerous. So the relationship between the members of the island and the population around you has changed. So you see, it's not just an environmental change; it's a social change as well. And that's what we have. That's the one way to approach this narrative. My point is that it's not only this is an incomplete way, because let's try again. Okay, because the city doesn't happen without nature. My point, my argument is that those are not two separate kinds of approaches, but they have to be considered together. They have to be considered in a context. What the changes that we see in the city advancing towards that area of Guanabara Bay, they can be perceived in the ecosystem. And that's what Louise and Lejeune do. Louise is the first one to notice. She was studying echinoderms, and she realized that was no longer so easy to find them. So she moved her object of study from echinoderms to rotatoria, which is much more resistant to pollution. And then Lejeune noticed that other animals were not showing there anymore. And in 1958, they could actually make a scale of pollution according to biological indicators. According to the number of the kind of animals that would disappear, they would attribute 1 degree of pollution. Which is nice, is that I like very much the second one. He refers to the alpheus, it's a kind of shrimp, this one. And at night, it makes click, click, click. It's a kind of a mating system. And at night, you can hear in the mangroves the clicking for a number of the shrimp. And what he writes, that is 58, that the nights are silent. The mangroves are silent because you no longer can hear this. I would like to remember you that's more or less the time that Rachel Carson was writing in Silent Spring. DDT has also to do with this because the situation is changing there too in order to be occupied by people. So this is one way to approach the story, the connection of cities and nature, and how the hydrobiology station shows the connections of these two different spheres. There's another possibility, which is also discussing that the sources allow us to understand how science and the state are connected there. One thing that shows very beautifully in the sources is the experience of making science in Brazil. Lack of money, lack of support, or the resourceful that I mentioned before. They needed, for instance, plankton networks to capture plankton. There's none. So they go to an airport and find old parachutes. And with the parachute silk, they created the plankton networks. They had money for one dredge, a Swiss dredge, very expensive, to collect material from the bottom of the bay. If they lose that thing, there's not another one. So they take the Swiss dredge to a blacksmith in the countryside, in the periphery of Brazil, of Rio, and ask them to reproduce exactly the same dredge. Close enough. The Swiss dredge was never used. It was locked in the lab while they had the 3 facsimiles being used. So if you lose some of those, fine, you have the original. You can just have another one. The boat is broken. No, it's going to take 3 months to get money from the institute. The scientists just put together some money from their own in order to keep working. So all the diaries of Legend and Lise, they tell about these stories, the everyday life of a scientist in Brazil during the 20th century. And I think this is fabulous, and we have very few of these sources. The other thing that the diaries shows us, the annual reports, is how, as pollution advanced, the relationship between the lab and the Instituto Oswaldo Cruz was becoming more frail. The usefulness that the lab had to the Institute was becoming lower and lower. They could no longer provide the same organism. They could no longer promise the same observations and the same kind of science that the Institute was expecting. But even so, it could go longer for much longer. It could go for much longer, except that you have the dictatorship. In 1964, Brazil enters a military dictatorship. In Manguinhos, in the Instituto Oswaldo Cruz, there are a number of scientists that were identified as being leftist or against the government or whatever. The point is they were fired, and according to the laws, the laws of the dictatorship, they could not find any job in public service. Now, most of science in Brazil is funded by the government. That is pretty much saying that you can no longer work in Brazil. That was important not only because of those 10 first-rate scientists that had to abandon Brazil, but for the entire new generation of young scholars that they would train and no longer would find in the Instituto Oswaldo Cruz a place for the training. In the case of Legend, he was pretty much, he couldn't care less about politics. And probably he was more right-wing than left-wing anyway. But this political interference represented a huge interference in the autonomy of the Institute. In other words, they had all the scientists would work under close scrutiny. And some of this more experimental or less connected experience, such as the Hydrobiology lab, would no longer have any kind of sponsorship. So the relationship between the lab and institution was becoming more and more frail. The way that Legend solved it was with a huge networking. From 1963 on, I can find Legend's name, less Louise, but a lot of Legend, in documents of all these other institutions which are in some way working Guanabara Bay. The sanitary engineering, Navy, Petrobras, the Foundation for Environmental Engineering of the state of Rio de Janeiro. They all want to know what's happening in the bay, and there's one person who knows it very well, who is Legend. So he's creating these classes in these other institutions. He's creating outreach experiences, and the more it becomes peripheral to the Instituto Oswaldo Cruz, the more it becomes important in all these other institutions, mostly through these personal links with other scientists, middle-level scientists. So this is another possible narrative, how the Bay can tell us how science and the state regarding the environment have changed in Brazil during the 20th century. And here I'm pretty much closing my story, which is not so much of a happy ending. First, what happened to our man, woman, and the island? Legend Oliveira was forced to retire eventually in '77. He went to teach in the university, the same university that had changed so much the area where he had studied. He died in '83. His wife, he died in '79. His wife would take over the chair until '83, Louisa. So we have not even pictures of him. The island has also disappeared physically. The island, as more and more of the bay was used for housing, the island, there was a huge landfill, and the island became part of a complex for popular housing. And the lab would be more or less here. Louisa, however, is very well, thank you. This is she, 90 years old, strong as an ox, her family, and she gave me this interview 8 years ago, and I talked to her and to my Facebook friend, his daughter, quite often, and she's doing really well. And she has been keeping this memory of her work and Legend's for a long time. But what I want you to take from this particular discussion, first, you make narratives, right? And in environmental history, there's this huge discussion: should we leave the collectionist narratives? Should we not? We are just telling stories about how everything goes from bad to worse, etc. And I think you have to challenge a bit what this declensionist narrative means. It is a declensionist narrative. It is. I mean, if you look at the Bay the way it was in '37, and the most recent news about the Bay, about German athletes that are preparing for the Olympics in Brazil and getting sick because they swam in Guanabara Bay, oh yeah, it's a declensionist narrative. On the other hand, things are changing because this narrative in the long term also tells us about the creation of scientific practice out of the day-by-day experience of scientists, and creating some kind of a local science, which Professor Stuart McCook, when studying Latin America, discussed it. Do we have a Creole science, a kind of science that is created exactly from this experience and the decisions that are not just making in a lab, but in the interaction of different scientific institutions? Do we have a kind of science that's created out of this gender disparity, out of this lack of money and need for resourcefulness? And I think that Guanabara debate tells us, yes, this kind of story too. So it's not only a declensionist narrative. And the third thing that I was not so much expecting it was that we saw a number of personal and institutional networks that become very, very important, mostly in this middle-level technical personnel. And this is important because so many times studies on Brazilian and Latin America state have showed how the institutions are weak, and that would bring to a huge discontinuity of projects. On the other hand, what my research has shown is that the ability of this middle-level personnel, technocrats if you want, to create connections, even when the institutions were weak, were able to keep projects going on and make some of these projects, as for instance the study of pollution in Guanabara Bay, to survive a coup d'etat, the dismantling of the lab, and the complete abandonment of the mission by the mother institution, the Instituto Oswaldo Cruz. Because the concept, the ideas of Lejeune are still being used now by the pollution control institutions in Rio de Janeiro today. Some of those 10 degrees of degradation, of pollution, are the basis for more modern studies. So even if he was kind of forgotten by his own institution, he was able to seed these ideas in a number of different institutions thanks to his personal connections. And this is something new for our study on the state. So what I wanted to discuss is a bit things like this, how an environmental narrative, environmental history narrative can also be an urban narrative and can also be a study of the state, and can also bring some considerations about the study of science. So there's a lot to be done with environmental history. Thank you.
Lise, I think this was a wonderful paper. Really something like an eco-biography of an island, with the death of an island in the end, but also a history of science and the story of the career of women and of dangerous men and of clicking trips. So it's got all the ingredients, and I think it's amazing. I think you've shown us how you can